Hi, I'm Sam Coffman with The Human Path at thehumanpath.com, and this particular video is going to be about herbal eye washes. I want to talk a little bit about the mechanics of them, what we use to make, in other words, what we use to make an herbal eye wash out of, the kind of solution we make, as well as what we use, different things we can use for eye cups, and how we do it and why that works better than certain other ways of cleaning out the eye, as well as just kind of an approach to the actual tissue of the eye and how we work with that. This is a subject that probably it's not really it's not really discussed or taught a lot, in my opinion. I mean, we teach it a lot in my school. It's part of our, we have a whole first aid section that we do, and we certainly include it in that, and it's more in depth than what you're going to get in this video. But I think you're still going to get plenty of fundamentals from this video that are going to allow you to go out and use an eye wash as you need. But I think that it's just one of those things that a lot of people don't really either know about or just don't use, and it's very effective. One of the things I usually talk about right off the bat in most of my herbology classes is talking about the different ways that we can affect tissue and how we have an advantage as herbalists by being able to choose our route of administration for herbs. That's very important. That's actually a very profound concept, and it gives an advantage to herbalists, I think, that you don't get from pharmaceutical or allopathic medicine. Most allopathic medicines, are designed to be able to go into your gut and eventually into your bloodstream and work that way. Whereas a lot of herbs don't work that way very well. There's many herbs that you can give that work well in the gut that won't ever make it out to the bloodstream. There are some that do, of course. There are many that do, but you can't just say every herb that you just take it internally in your stomach, and just like you take a medication, an antibiotic or something like that orally, and assume it's going to work, because it doesn't really work that way very well. But instead, what herbs do really well that pharmaceutical medicines don't is they work in conjunction with tissue, with different types of tissue. So what you find is that instead of just taking something for a sore throat that orally that's going to go through your bloodstream and work on that you can actually, you want to affect the actual tissue, the mucosal layer of the throat. So you can use what I call mucosal vulneraries for something like that. Or if you want to affect the respiratory system, you could use steam inhalation to do that, to actually coat and work with that. Or you work with herbs that you actually exhale in order to excrete. You actually exhale like juniper or garlic, where you actually get that route of administration comes out through your lungs in one way or another, through your respiratory system. So we have dozens of different routes of administration, everything from one side of the body to the other, where we're talking about douches and enemas and suppositories, all the way up to, neti pots and nasal type of administration, and in ear oils. And so one of those is an eye wash. And so we take advantage of that. But in order to really take advantage of getting that herb directly onto the tissue, really touching that tissue and working with it, interacting with it, you have to know what type of tissue that you're working with, and that makes a big difference in terms of what herbs that you choose to work with. Okay, so not every herb works the same way on different types of tissue. This is really big, for instance, with poultices, and I'm making a video on poultices real soon, and we'll talk about that. But poultices the same way. If you've got a cut or an abrasion or a burn, and you're putting a poultice on it, there are different types of herbs there are some herbs that you might think would work really well that just don't work really well with that type of tissue. And it's the same thing with the eye, in my opinion. So let's talk briefly about what type of tissue the eye actually is, and that helps us then understand what kind of herbs that would work well with it. So the eye itself, if we're just talking about the eyeball, what we see, when we think of the eye, which is one of the parts we're trying to affect, not everything, but part of what we're trying to affect if we want to give somebody an eye wash. Let's stop back up for 1 second. Why would we want to give an eye wash? Why would we give an herbal eye wash to somebody? And there's a lot of different reasons. Either you could be an injury, a corneal abrasion or something, where you're walking through the woods at night. So this could be, and a lot of what we teach at the Human Path is related to wilderness medicine. When you don't have a clinic and you don't have your home, even you have to make do with what you've got. And so that's very common in the backwoods, especially if you're walking at night. You guys in the military, when I was in, that was very common. I've got my eyes scratched more than once in the walking through the woods at night if you don't have eye protection. So there's that. There's an actual injury, right? Or maybe conjunctivitis, whether it's viral or bacterial or some sort of a pathogenic caused conjunctivitis. You can also get conjunctivitis, just inflammation of the conjunctiva, if you have certain types of allergies. Or maybe tired eyes, just sitting and working at the computer all day and your eyes are just really tired, and it's a really good refreshing way to help your eye rejuvenate. So the thing to remember about the eye is that the eye is It's one of the fastest healing organs in the body. Yet at the same time, it's also one of the most sensitive organs in the body. So it's very easy to in giving an eye wash to cause more irritation really than you're helping. An eye wash should never hurt. It should always be rejuvenating and feel good. I mean, if it doesn't feel good, then you're probably not using the right herbs. So it should always feel really good. Secondly, you don't want to put herbs in there that are going to gum up the eye and force it to have to try to get rid of them. So for instance, I would never use mucilaginous herbs in an eye wash, okay? Now this is all my opinion and my experience, and take everything you ever hear from any herbalist with a grain of salt, certainly to include me. But in my experience, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't use mucilaginous herbs. So what type of tissue are we talking about? Because mucilaginous herbs work very well for certain types of tissue, what I call mucosal vulneraries. So the inside of the nose, of course, the throat, the mouth, the GI tract. You know, all of those are certain types of mucosal lining that work really demulcents like cyprium or like marshmallow root or licorice root. They all work really well with, but if you put them in the eye, they're going to cause irritation. It's just going to be a bunch of foreign matter. And so the same thing, so what you have to do is consider that. And so what I started off by talking about was what type of tissue are we talking about with the eye? And really the tissue of the eye that we're affecting is really a very fibrous layer. The eye is made up of basically 3 different layers of tissue. We have a fibrous, that's the most superficial, or what we see, and then deeper to that, on the inside of that, we have a vascular layer, and then deeper to that, we have the retina. So, but what we're really talking about is that fibrous layer that really is probably most akin to connective tissue in terms of how it's made up. And so we have to think about what kind of herbs we would use that would affect that, and a mucilaginous type of herb won't really affect connective tissue very well. Neither will, there's other types of herbs that won't either, but we'll get to that. And then we have the conjunctiva, the part of the eye that actually connects on the inside of the eyelid. We consider that, you could consider that sort of a mucosal layer, but it's really not. There's different types of epithelial tissue. I think there's about 8 types, but there's also an uncommon type that you find with the connective tissue, or with the conjunctiva. Okay, and it's called stratified columnar, and you find that type of tissue really more around ducts and glands, like salivary glands and like your sweat glands, and that's the same type that you find in your conjunctiva. So, of course, because of tear ducts, right? And so, affecting that is also something that you want to be aware of, because it's really not the same as, for instance, the type of mucosal layer you'd find in the nose or in the respiratory tract, the upper respiratory tract with goblet cells, where it's secreting mucus. Your eyes don't secrete mucus; they secrete tears, of course, as we know. So there again, we've got a certain type of tissue, and that means we need certain types of herbs that work really well with those. So what we're going to do in this video is we'll work through the actual mechanics of doing an eye wash, of course. And I want this to, again, be kind of a quick video. This isn't as much in depth as I get in a class, but I think it'll still give you a good idea of where to start with this. So what we're going to do is talk a little bit more about herbs as we get into the mechanics of that, but I just wanted to start you off thinking, in terms of tissue, and also tissue state is important, but with the eye, really, what type of tissue are we trying to affect, how are we trying to affect it, and how does an eye wash work? So last thing I'll leave you with is, before getting back behind the camera and talking a little bit, is that eye washes are extremely effective. I use them a lot. I think they're very, very effective for many different things, and I think they're more effective than just washing the eye out. And here we get back to sort of that irritation thing. Now, if you have some sort of a caustic material, an acid or an alkali or something that got into the eye, then of course you need to flush that out of the eye as quickly as you can. So your lesser irritation, of course, is the movement of fluid across the eye to wash it out. But if we're just talking about the things that I mentioned at the beginning of this video, which would be conjunctivitis or an injury to the eye, some sort of a corneal abrasion, or tired eyes, or an allergic type of eye, then washing it out is just going to cause more irritation. So aside from washing out really very bothersome foreign matter that is caustic and hurting the eye, and you need to get out as quickly as possible, aside from that, I would say an eye wash is superior to most other forms of eye care. And an herbal eye wash sort of takes the best of both worlds and gives that sort of the nutrient tissue stimulation and tissue support and restoration that certain types of tissue needs to be able to deal with whatever it is, whether it's again, any of those 4 or 5 different things that I talked about that are important and why we would use an eye wash in the very first place. So now I'm going to get behind the camera and talk a little bit about the actual herbs, the actual mechanics, and how we're going to make an eye wash. How do we actually do that? And then how do we actually apply the eye wash? And what are some of the things we can do if we're not in a clinic, we're not in an urban area, and we don't maybe have an eye cup in our backpack or our first aid kit? What are some of the things we can use for it then too? So when we talk about the eye wash itself, the actual what we're going to use to give the eye wash, the best thing we can use really are eye wash cups. Now eye wash cups you can buy online for about, I think you can get a half a dozen of them for about $10, $8, something in that range. I have a bunch of them that I keep in my wilderness first aid kit, and I took them out of, this is what I use in the house, keeping them in a case like this, but there's way too much container there for an actual wilderness first aid kit, so you could just put them in a good Ziploc bag or whatever. And so as you notice, this actually shapes to the form of the eye. So this is the ideal. These are really good. They're nice and kind of soft plastic, so they cup to the eye real well. So you can use those. But in a pinch, what if you didn't have that? And not everybody necessarily carries around eye wash cups because it might be something that you consider just, it's too rare that you'd actually use it. And so there's other things you could certainly use. You could use it around the home. You could use a shot glass. So maybe if you had a few too many of these the night before and your eyes are kind of tired, you can just use the same shot glass you used to get drunk the night before for your eyes. And as you can see, of course, very soft. It's not perfect. It doesn't align to the eye as well, but you can certainly use them. I've used them before, and they work just fine. Even though it's round, mainly what you want is something that's going to basically adhere to around the eye in sort of a suction manner to be able to keep the water or the eye wash solution being able to drip out. In a pinch, you could even use, again, this is back to alcohol, a lid of some sort. This is a lid to a vodka bottle, so again, back to, to drinking. So maybe we didn't have the shot glass available because we drank the vodka straight out of the bottle, and the next morning we've got hangover eyes, and we need to use an eye wash. So now this, as you can see, has kind of a sharp edge, and it probably wouldn't be as good about that. So anything like this, of this size, of course, obviously we're going to make sure that it's clean first, whether that means just rinsing it out because it's it's already fairly clean, or even if you need to, throwing it in a pot of boiling water for a minute or so to be able to clean it out. And that's plastic, so we're not going to boil it very long, but long enough to be able to kill germs. That's really the main thing. And so if we needed to make it more soft on the eye itself and have a better suction also on the skin, we could use tape. We could use duct tape preferably, just because of the fact that it would it's a little bit better for stopping the the edge between the skin and the plastic. Or we could just use our cloth tape that we have in our kit. Or if you keep duct tape in your kit, I'm going to talk about the other things we put into our first aid kit, and duct tape is one of them. Now it's again, we've got a little bit of tape adhesive there and things like that aren't necessarily ideal to go in the eye, but it's gonna be just a short-term, one-time use. And we're gonna try to, when you do this, you want to make sure that you try to get that coating of the tape down as close to the edge as possible. And it's really not going to, the fluid isn't really going to come up there. It's going to be about halfway up, and it's only going to be for a short period of time it even comes up there. So that gives us a softer edge, and if we had to do a couple layers, we could even do that. Okay, so for something like that, or even something like this, if we had a bottle that was clean or that we could clean out, we could cut this bottle in half, using scissors. We could just cut that bottle in half and use something like that. Or, if we happen to have swimming goggles, you never know. We had everything else, but we didn't have swimming goggles. Obviously, swimming goggles adhere to the cup of the eye. And again, we clean them out, make sure they don't have a bunch of chlorine in them and stuff, but we could use that as well. So those are a number of different things. And another thing, just, out in the wilderness backpacking or whatever, we've got an Nalgene bottle here with a lid. The lid is about perfect size there. That's actually a good size. It's actually probably better size than this. This is a little on the small side. This here would be really good size. So again, this may be the water that we're hauling around in the first place, in our backpack, and now we've got an eye wash cup in there as well. So now let's talk about the fluid. What are we going to actually use in the eye wash, in the eye wash itself? We want our eye wash to be isotonic. In other words, not to be hyper or hypotonic. We don't want it to burn the eye or to disturb the eye, so we want the saline content of our fluid to be very similar to that of our eye. And in order to do that, we need about a 0.9%. And what that formula is, you can easily remember this, and you should anyway. We teach this in all our first aid classes about fluid oral rehydration solutions that you make out on the fly, out in the woods, whatever, using just your water. And so for saline solution, what we want is we have the formula is approximately a quart of water to a teaspoon of salt. Okay, so a liter over a heaping teaspoon, or a quart for a teaspoon of salt. And so what that means is if we're gonna, for an eye wash, we're obviously not going to need a quart of water. We're not even going to need a cup of water. We're barely going to need, a fraction of a cup. Maybe we're talking about 5 milliliters or most for a couple eye washes, 10 milliliters of fluid. And so what we want to do there is we're gonna basically take, let's just make a cup full of fluid, because what we're gonna do is we're gonna make an eye wash tea as such, and add the salt to it after we've made the tea, and then the amount that we want to do, I wanted to run through here quickly. So the actual amount itself would be for a cup, if a teaspoon was for a quart, for 0.9% saline approximately. Then for a cup, we would need a quarter teaspoon, since there are 4 cups in a quart, right? And so what we can do, and this is, we can use preferably non-iodized salt. This is sea salt. And what I wanted to do was just show how much salt actually is in a quarter teaspoon. So let me just carefully create a quarter teaspoon here, approximately. And again, we're not going to be right on the money on any of this. This is like cooking. Herbology is very much like cooking, and some people like to have everything measured exactly, but believe me, that's not what you do, and that doesn't work. It wouldn't even if you could. So here's a quarter teaspoon of salt. So I just want to see how much is that in my hand. Okay, so I get a good idea as to what that is. So obviously I'm not going to carry around measuring spoons in a field environment necessarily, or maybe I don't even have measuring spoons in a clinic, and I need to make saline. I don't have any saline on hand. So this is about how much it would be. So it's good when you work with those amounts to just kind of know what that is, how much that would actually be. When it's spread out, when it's in your palm of your hand, how much is that? And that'll give you a pretty close approximation. So much better off than having pure water, and much better, in terms of its effect on the eye. Okay, so there's our quarter teaspoon. So how we would do that then is we would measure out a cup. Now again, if depending on the type of water bottle you have, you might already have these measurements here, and you could figure that out. And of course a cup would be 8 ounces, so we're good there. Okay, but what we're going to do is we're going to actually measure out a cup of tea. We're going to make tea first, and then we're going to put the salt into it after that. Okay, that's what I like to do anyway, rather than putting salt in the water and then making a tea. We have to put herb into the water somehow, and so to do that we're going to actually make an infusion. Okay, so I'm going to make an infusion. I'll be back. Alright, I'm back, and I'm back with a couple of different herbs, a couple of fresh herbs that I could use here, but I will go through a list of more herbs offline, or as soon as I get done with this part, I'll put out a list and talk briefly about that, and sort of the type of herbs that you would want to normally use. I already talked a little bit about mucilaginous and why you wouldn't want to use it, but other herbs and why we wouldn't, or why we would use them. In the meantime, I just ran out in the backyard here and grabbed a few different types of herbs that I could certainly use. And one of them that I really like a lot is not available right now, just because it's February, and that's mesquite. I love mesquite leaf eye washes. Those are really, really very, very good. But without the mesquite leaf, still, literally in my backyard, within about 3 minutes, I've got a few things. I've got live oak. So this is oak. I've got a yarrow leaf here, and I've got agarita leaf. Any one of these 3 would be very good. So they kind of go, in terms of astringency, I guess I didn't mean to, but I kind of put them in astringency. This is probably the least astringent, this is probably more astringent, and this is probably the most astringent of these 3. So any one of these are going to work. We definitely are usually trying to go for astringency in an eye wash. No matter what we're doing it for, astringency is always good on that tissue. It works very well. Today, my favorite is actually yarrow, so we're going to go for the middle one. I don't really believe in doing formulas. You can, but I don't think it's really useful. I just go for a simple, just one herb, pick one herb, put it in. It doesn't need to be a strong tea. It just needs to be one herb, in my opinion, does as well as doing 10 herbs. And I've had experience trying it both ways, also with students who've tried it even not just with humans, but even with cattle who've had eye injuries and such, and just really, simples work really well. So I'm going to go ahead and make a yarrow tea out of fresh yarrow. Now this could be dried, it could be fresh, it doesn't matter. And I'm going to just put that into a mason jar. And I'm going to pour some hot water on it, and I'm going to let it sit. Now, before I pour my hot water on there, I want to know exactly how much. Now, I've got a measurement here on the mason jar, but if I didn't, I would measure in 1 cup. So I'm going to go ahead and pour in 1 cup of water, just because remember we have to make a saline solution out of this now too. So I got 1 cup. And that means that I'm going to be able to add 1/4 teaspoon of salt after I've got my tea and let that sit for a little while. I'm going to grab a lid and put it on top of that and just let that sit, and I'll come back and we'll finish up with showing you how we actually apply the eye wash, and then we'll go through some different herbs that we can use. All right, we're back, and here I've let my tea. I've let my tea sit. I put a lid on it. I shook it up a little bit. I could have, you know, for those purists out there, saw I was doing this with fresh leaf. I could have macerated the leaf a little better, you know, chopped it up and then put it in there. And remember, we're going for a week infusion here. It's not really necessary. I've only got 3 little leaves in there. It's enough. Yarrow's pretty strong. Besides, remember that too much maceration can make you go blind. So what I wanted to do then was just put the leaves directly in there, let them sit, and let them infuse. And what I can do is I can then just check it by smell, and I could even pour some into into my shot glass. Another reason to have a shot glass around and test it and just taste it. And this is another thing, I'll get into this briefly when I talk about herbs you can use, but you can test herbs just by tasting them. You can give a good idea as to the astringency of them and whether or not they would work for your eye. And yarrow, certainly with the tea, now that we're done with that, we could do it. We could taste the tea and just see how strong it is. And I already have, and it's a weak tea, and that's what I want. I don't want a really strong tea for this. So now let me just go ahead and filter it, and the easiest way to do that is just to go ahead and pour it in through a strainer. Okay. So now I've got my strained yarrow infusion, and all I need to do now is to get it to the right salience, or the right amount of saline in there, which is 0.9%, again, to match as closely as I can my eye. Now remember, if we already had saline solution, we wouldn't have to go through all of this. I understand that, but I'm assuming that you know that you would know that you could just take saline solution and do what we're doing now. The difference is making tea and making, with the saline solution, you might lose a little bit if you let that water evaporate or get too hot first. So I prefer to just start from the very beginning and just make my hot water and add my saline to it, or my salt to it. Now remember, we went into the whole thing of salt, and I did that 1/4 teaspoon just for the very purpose of being able to do this, because I'm out in the field now and I may not know how much a 1/4 teaspoon is. So I'm going to just do that. That's about what I had before, 1/4 teaspoon. Yeah, that's close enough. It's maybe a little bit less than what I had. So about like that. That's about a 1/4 teaspoon there, close to it. Okay, drop that in there. I actually lost a little bit of water here anyway when I poured some off. So we're close enough there to 0.9%. That's fine. So we can stir that up or shake that up or whatever we're going to do. And now we're ready. This is the right temperature, and it is the right percentage of saline in there. And we're ready to go ahead and do an eye wash. So again, I could use any of these cups. Since I've already got an eye wash cup here, I'm going to go ahead and use that, since that's the best thing I could use. And what I do with this is I'm going to fill it up about halfway with my saline solution, with my eye wash. About halfway. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that on my eye, put my head down and put it on my eye, and then lift my head up. And then what I want to do is I want to leave my eye open and kind of move it around inside that solution and let that wash it off. And it should feel good. It shouldn't hurt, okay? It should feel okay. So here I is. I have my eye open now, and I'm going to open it. Oh! Oh, God! Just kidding. Works really well, actually. It feels really good. I just had to do that. I do that all the time for every class, so sorry, you get it too. So halfway, put this down on my eye, and now open my eye and move it around inside. Blink it a little bit if I want, and unfortunately if you blink, sometimes you'll pop the water out the way I just did there, and you get a good saline drink there as well. So it's kind of a rehydration solution as well as an eye wash when you do that. Then when I'm ready, I put my eye back down. That feels really good. It really does. I mean, it's just refreshing. My eye feels good. I'm going to do that in my other eye. I'm going to empty that out. Now, if you're going to go and give eye washes to more than one person, of course, you're going to clean this eye cup out. And if you even need to, if there's conjunctivitis or anything like that, you're going to need to boil it or sterilize it. You could even use hydrogen peroxide or alcohol, something like that, in order to sterilize it first before you move it to the next person. If you're doing this in a class, obviously, when we do it in a class, we wash it out between each use. Once is just not enough. I have to do it in both eyes. That's really good. Man, I needed that. I've been on the computer a lot these last few days, and man, it feels good. So that's it. What I'm going to finish off with is giving you a list of different herbs that you can use. Looks like I've been crying, but I'm a sensitive guy, but I haven't been. It's just the eye wash. All right. So to finish up here, I'm going to go ahead and scroll through some of my favorite eye wash herbs. And remember, what we're talking about here mostly are astringent or restorative, regenerative type herbs, or in the case of a pathogenic type of infection, maybe a conjunctivitis of either viral or bacterial origin, we are looking at things that are maybe antimicrobial as well. So I'll go ahead and give a list of all of the herbs that I really like to use a lot. And remember, one more reminder, we're talking mostly about connective type tissue in terms of the eye, very fibrous tissue. And in terms of the conjunctiva, we're talking more about a secretory tissue, like the type that we would have that secretes, sweat or saliva. So it's porous, but it's not mucous membrane in the sense of if we want to, put a bunch of demulcents or anything on there that make the eye have to feel like it has to clean itself out. We're trying to keep the eye as clean as possible, have that water as filtered as possible, and really allow it, give it something, some sort of an herbal invigoration, restoration, and of course, if possible, even an antimicrobial if we need it. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this and learned something, and until next time, bye.